وصحبه ومن والاه. أما بعد. First of all, let me just say that it's an honor for me to be here tonight. And I was not expecting to say anything, but I think that since I've been put on the spot by Sheikh Yasser, there's some things that I think are important for us to contemplate. And that is one of the closest or one of the best ways to draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through constant calling upon Him. A lot of times we're negligent of the importance of dua, even though the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah." Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah. That dua, to translate it literally, dua is the worship. Now, a lot of times we translate that as the essence of worship or something like that. But we all speak English. And what does it mean when you say so-and-so, like Sheikh Omar, is the man? What does that mean? That means that he embodies all of those qualities of manhood. Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah is to show you how important dua is in establishing your relationship of servitude with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you call upon Him and you show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're truly depending upon Him. And the best dua that we can make are those prophetic du'as, those du'as that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself used to make and that he would teach his companions. Now, interestingly enough, there was a companion who came to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and he said to him, "Ya Rasulullah, la uhsinu dandanatak wa dandanata Mu'adh." I don't have the ability, a dandana, it means to hum. So you know, like sometimes when a person is making a lot of dua, it just sounds like right? So he said, I can't make dua the same way that you make dua and the way that Mu'adh makes dua. Mu'adh ibn Jabal was one of the famous companions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. He said, so I ask Allah for al-Jannah and I seek refuge in Allah from the fire. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Hawlaha nudandin. We're humming about these things. I mean, everything else that we're asking is basically summed up in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Jannah and seeking refuge in Him from the fire. That being said, if we can memorize some of the prophetic dua, it is so important for us, and I can actually say add to our arsenal if we look at dua being a weapon, in fact. And it is the weapon of the believer. There's a dua that the Prophet ﷺ taught one of his famous companions, and that's the dua that I'd like to go over tonight very briefly. And that companion was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who was one of the, how many that were promised with Jannah? One of the 10 that were promised Jannah, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. And he said that the Prophet ﷺ used to teach us this dua and that we should say it dubara salawat. Now, dubara salawat, it means at the end of prayer. And some may interpret it to mean after prayer, but the correct interpretation, inshallah, is that it is before the taslim and after you've done a tashahud and salah ala Nabi alayhi salatu wassalam. So this is the place where the Prophet ﷺ would make this dua, and he taught Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas to make this dua. And in some of the narrations of Sahih Bukhari, Sa'd used to teach his children this dua the way that one would learn how to write. The way that, so they used to have what are known as katatib, right? So they would go and teach the children how to write. And that takes a lot of care, correct? I mean, you don't just let somebody go. So they were saying that Sa'd used to teach them this dua, his own children, the same way that one would teach, the same way that one would learn how to write. And this dua that the Prophet ﷺ would make at the end of salah is as follows. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-jubn wa a'udhu bika min al-bukhl wa a'udhu bika an uradda ila ardhil al-umr wa a'udhu bika min fitnati ad-dunya wa adhab al-qabr. It's collected by Imam al-Bukhari. So these are 5 things that the Prophet ﷺ sought refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from. And as you know, a lot of dua, the Prophet ﷺ is asking Allah for something. There are another set of dua where the Prophet ﷺ is seeking refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal from something. That is, that these qualities are not qualities that we should have as believers, or that we are seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection from something happening to us. So there are 5 things here. The first of them, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-jubn. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from cowardice. I seek refuge in you from cowardice. Wallahi, wallahi. We are so much in need of making this dua because it is cowardice that may prevent us from worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when times are difficult, right? So many people don't pray at work. Why don't pray at work? Somebody's gonna kill them because they pray at work? No, they just don't want to be looked at funny. I don't want people looking at me funny. Or I don't want to. That is a feeling that prevents you from doing something that is an obligation in your deen. And that is the result of cowardice. And we can't sit up and we can't sugarcoat it and look at it any other kind of way. We have to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from cowardice. That cowardice that is going to prevent us from doing our obligations. Now, mind you, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail, if a person is in a situation where they're going to be harmed physically, or some harm is going to come to them or their property because they are praying, then that's a whole different scenario that deserves its own fatwa and things like this. But what I'm talking about is in general, that which would prevent us from doing that which is an obligation upon us is from cowardice. We have to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that. And our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam taught his companions this. And because of them memorizing this dua and passing it on to their children, we are here today learning this dua. We seek refuge in Allah from al-jubn. The second thing is, وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنَ الْبُخْلِ. I seek refuge in you from stinginess or being miserly. And this is also not from the qualities of the believers. Believers are generous because they know that what they give for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will get it back multiple times over. And so a believer is kareem, right? A believer is generous and not stingy. Doesn't withhold, number one, what is obligation upon him, whether that is zakat or whether that is taking care of his children or taking care of his parents in certain scenarios. All of these are things that a believer should do, and he avoids being miserly. وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنَ الْبُخْلِ. The Prophet ﷺ goes on to say, وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْ أَنْ أُرَدَّ إِلَىٰ أَرْضَ لِلْعُمُرِ. And I seek refuge in you from being returned to a decrepit state. To a person, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن نُعَمِّرْهُ نُنَكِّسْهُ فِي الْخَلْقِ. Right? Those whom we allow to live long, we reverse their development. In other words, so what happens? A person starts out an infant, toddler, and then they grow and they become strong. And then what happens? You reach a certain peak, and then the development begins to reverse. You get weaker and weaker and weaker. Ardil al-umr is the worst of one's lifespan. So that's when a person gets to the point of senility and being at a decrepit old state, to the point that they cannot care for themselves any longer. Perhaps they cannot clean themselves. They become a burden on their families. The Prophet ﷺ sought refuge in Allah from getting back to that state. Now, why do you think that is? Is there something wrong with growing old? There's something wrong when you can no longer fulfill your purpose in life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to be worshipers. And when a person gets to the state in life where they can no longer worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they fulfilled their time on earth. And so the Prophet ﷺ sought refuge in Allah from getting to a point where he would not be a worshiper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala any longer, where his existence served no real meaning in terms of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and where it became a burden upon others. So the Prophet ﷺ taught us to seek refuge in Allah from this. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْ فِتْنَةِ الدُّنْيَا. And I seek refuge in you from the temptations of this dunya. And fitnat dunya is a comprehensive term. It's so many things. But we all know that there are distractions in this life that take us away from our main purpose and our main focus. And so we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from those things. And that in and of itself could be a khutbah. I mean, just talking about a'udhu bika min fitnat ad-dunya. Wa adhab al-qabr, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, and from the punishment or the torment of the grave, the torment of the grave. And that is that once a person dies, his hereafter begins. Right? So now there's a difference between Yawm al-Qiyamah and the hereafter. Yawm al-Qiyamah being the time when all of the souls are resurrected, and then they stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's an account, and they are judged. But once an individual dies, qamat qiyamatuhu, and his hereafter begins at that point, and it is a different stage of life. And that qabr may be a rawda min riyad al-jannah, it may be a garden from the gardens of paradise. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our graves spacious and to make them gardens from the gardens of paradise. Or it may be, waliyadu billah, a pit from the pits of the hellfire. And how that is beyond the comprehension of man. Our intellects stop at a certain point. We also need to understand this as Muslims, that we accept what comes to us from revelation, from the Qur'an and from the Sunnah of our Messenger, alayhi salatu wasalam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us about fitnat al-qabr, and he taught us about adhab al-qabr, that there is a test that happens after a person dies, that a person is asked, who is your Lord? And what is your deen? Who is your messenger? Alayhi salatu wasalam. And we believe this even though we don't understand how that is. And again, this is very important for the methodology of the Muslim to recognize certain things. You know, if we look at our senses, for example, you can see fairly well. What's on the other side of this? What do you see beyond this wall right here? Nothing. Why? Because there's something that is impeding your vision. Even though you have the ability to see, you can see well. And even if that was the case, and even though you may see well, your sight has a certain limit and then it stops. Your ability to hear has a certain limit and then it stops. Correct? There's bound. Why is it that some of us believe that our intellects don't have any boundaries, that I can just understand everything? And it's okay. We believe it, and we know that it is a reality, and we can understand part of it, and there are parts that are unseen that we do not know about. And this is our Prophet ﷺ teaching us to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the torment of the grave. And so this dua is a dua that we should memorize. Again, it can be studied in a lot more detail, but these are 5 things that the Prophet ﷺ sought refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from, and I hope that this will be an encouragement for all of you to learn this dua the same way that Sa'd, who heard it from the Prophet ﷺ, used to teach his children this dua. And all of you should take this dua and teach your children. Teach your children, because everyone who you teach this dua, if you teach your children this dua, you'll get the reward that they get for making this dua. I'll end with a story. In Ramadan, I was in Medina. I was listening to Ida'atul Qur'an al-Kareem, which is the radio station where they play Qur'an and other beneficial Islamic things throughout the day. And subhanAllah, there was a story about a famous da'iyah. He called to Islam, he was knowledgeable, and everybody in the school knew him. But he always taught first grade. So there was a new principal who came in, and he switched his schedule. And he put him in the higher grades because he's a sheikh. Why is he teaching, kids 5 and 6 years old or 6 and 7 years old? I mean, it's kind of like if you take a professor in, calculus or something like this, and you put him in the first grade and he's teaching basic arithmetic. It's like, that's not a good use of our resources, right? So a new principal came in and he moved him to the higher grades. And so the sheikh began to cry. And he goes to the principal. He says, why did you change my schedule? He said, you're a sheikh and you're supposed to be, teaching the higher levels. And he said, He said, no, put me back in the first grade. He said, you've taken away from me the ability to be the first one to teach them how to make wudu, to be the first one to teach them how to pray, to be the first one to teach them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such that they would learn he said, I want every salat that they ever make for the rest of their life. I want the reward for that. And that was his intention. So I'm saying, take this dua, teach it to those who are around you, your spouses, your children and your family. That dua again is, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-jubn, wa a'udhu bika min al-bukhl, wa a'udhu bika min an uradda ila ardhi lil-umr, wa a'udhu bika min fitnati ad-dunya wa adhab al-qabr. Wallahu a'lam, sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad. لا خلاص شيخنا جزاكم الله خير.